Hello, my friends. It's been a while. Today is Saturday, the 22nd of 2022. And, that date may mean a little bit more once you get to the end of this video. But for those of you who have been on this journey with me since the beginning, we're hitting the climax. We're hitting the big payout. That's what today is going to be about. So, without further ado, I'm just going to jump on into this. Okay. So, on November 30th last year, I received an email. And I think that came after I did my last YouTube presentation, which was on metaverse and meta. But I've talked about this. I do some other things besides just the just YouTube presentations. I've talked about this on all of the different platforms which I go on regularly. So some of you, if you listen to any of that, well, you're probably, you're going to be familiar with this email. But for those of you who do not, well, let me tell you. On November 30th, I received this email. This is, I have redacted anything that would give away the person who has sent this email for a variety of reasons, but that's why you see the blackout right there. So, okay. So it says, Speaking Engagement is the title of the email. It was sent to the email address I have, not my personal one, the one tied to the website, and says, "Hello, Michael. My name is blank from blank Masonic Lodge in Philadelphia. I was reading your site and watching your YouTube channel, and I found all of the information very informative. I've been studying a lot around parallels and the one that Kelpius followed into Philadelphia and also John Smith into Utah through Pennsylvania. Needless to say, there is a treasure trove of information and work to dive into with these topics, and I find your work great. I run a group called Blank, and I am the blank president of our chapter. The group is dedicated to esoteric research, and I was wondering if you would be available to speak Wednesday, January 26th. We are going to host our event in Delaware County at Sher-e-Punjab in Media, PA, and would love to learn more about the 40th parallel. Thank you for your time and consideration," the person's name, and then this right here, 33 degrees. So, when I first got this, there's part of me that has always been wondering, why haven't I gotten this before? But this, particularly if you've been following along for a while, you know that I have had some interactions with the outer world with at least a window dressing of Freemasonry. So it's not exactly unheard of that I get contacted, but not to meet in person and not for a speaking engagement. So, my initial response was like, this is awesome. I'm curious. According to that email, they're familiar with my work. And, there's some people who, when they speak of Freemasonry, it is a real all or nothing sort of take. And, I try to approach it a little bit more diplomatically. I think it's a little bit more complex. But needless to say, I haven't been exactly, a fan, a cheerleader for that organization. So I was a little bit curious. I'm like, okay, let's go and see. And at the same time, a little bit flattered, I suppose, right? It's like, these are other people who are also students of studying documents, and it's a little bit of like, okay, we want to hear what you got to say. And so there's that. So I was excited, and when I first told this to a bunch of people, my friends and so forth, they were like, are you certain you want to go and do this, dude? Is this really the direction you want to go down? And for better or for worse, I have an amazingly trusting approach to life and reality. And, sometimes I've gotten burned, I suppose, but for the most part, like, that's how I would rather be that way. And so, but I also recognize, through experience that sometimes, I am not, I can see the highest in all, the best in all. And so, sometimes, I had to learn, I had lessons to learn. So nonetheless, I recognize that I have a blind spot. But needless to say, I had no concern whatsoever about this invitation. I was very, very excited to go and do it, and had almost immediately began working on the presentation, which is unlike me. I tend to wait till the last minute. So, all right. So, last week, I wake up, and I am in an anxious state, which is very uncommon for me. What made this state so unusual? I mean, I get nervous sometimes. I can get anxious at times, but I don't think of myself as typically very anxious. And the times when I am, I usually know why. I know why. Like, I'm anxious, I'm nervous about something. Like, there's something in my head, and so I know I'm nervous because my body responds, like, that like butterflies in the stomach, that sort of thing. But what made this so unusual for me was I had all of the physical indications of being nervous, but I had none of the mental. Like, I didn't know why I was nervous, but which makes it even like kind of worse. It's like, what's my body telling me? Like, when you hear about like your body communicates to you, like where it really matters is when your mind doesn't know what it's communicating. That's when you really should pause and take notice. So I was in that state, and that day I was looking at something. I was looking at my calendar, and I made a realization I had not made before. That this presentation, and let me also give you a little bit of background. Me and this individual, we went back and forth. We shared a whole bunch of emails, and everything seemed great. Everything was really, really, everything is really pleasant, professional, but also in a very kind of casual tone. The tone got a little bit even more soft after that first email, which was a pretty casual tone in terms of a message. And so, that was the nature. So it wasn't just that email, and we worked out all of the sort of details around it. But if you recall that first email, it very clearly the rigid points of the agreement. This is where we want you to do it, and this is when we want you to do it. That was those poles were already staked into the ground, and those stakes were already into the ground, if you will. So I make this realization that this date, which has always been the date, was on the anniversary of Kobe Bryant's death. So why is that interesting, Mike? So let's go back in time. We're going to go back to February 28th, 2020. And on this date, a presentation I gave on the Higher Side Chats was released. Michael Wan, The Esoteric Kobe Bryant, Skull and Bones, and Ritual Cycles. And also what's interesting, if you can think back in time, when this was released, this last week of February, the beginning of March, this was right before the the world changed. It was on the Ides of March 2020 when the first federal mandate began, when 14 days began to flatten the curve. And so this was like that. If you could think of 9/11, the events of 9/11 as being kind of a rite which the world went through, and there was a certain innocence which humanity had prior to that event, and then after that event, for whatever reason, like it changed. Well, the same thing has happened, when this became real, the flat and the curve became real. And so this was released in those final days of the that period of innocence. All right. So you might want to go back and listen to this presentation after hearing what I'm going to tell you today, but I'm going to walk you through the gist of it. And I'm going to go and pull up some slides, which I made for Greg, the host, because I was going to talk about some really complex stuff, and I know I needed a visual aid. It makes it much, much easier to follow along when you can kind of see it also with your eyes. So the long and short of it was, if you all remember, Kobe Bryant died in a dramatic helicopter crash. And, anytime there's a helicopter or plane crash, like, it just has an air of drama to it. Like, anytime there's a crash and someone dies, there's a bit of drama to it, but like something falling out of the sky, and the more exotic, if you will, the more strong of an impact it has in the individual and collective consciousness, which, go back to the Hindenburg and think about what that did to people when that game was rolled. But anyway, so Kobe dies in a plane crash, or in a helicopter crash, and that immediately kind of jumped out on my going back in time. Going back when it first happened, that jumped out in my mind. It was something that was, whenever you see something, you're like, all right, what there's more to this story. And then I remember there was a presentation done by Isaac Weishaupt, and he went into how Kobe, once he retired from basketball and became an author, and all of his work very much deals with esotericism and the occult and magic and stuff like that. And so that kind of sent me running. And where I ran to was this. From a basketball perspective, like, Kobe Bryant would be considered, maybe in the top 10 players of all time, let's say professional players. And, people argue, who's the greatest. But he is certainly recognized as being the greatest high school basketball player of all time. And so his high school is kind of significant in that lens. It's got some weight to it. I don't know I know a little bit about basketball, but I certainly don't know where most of the greats went to high school. But I knew where Kobe Bryant went to high school because that was part of his mythology. And so the reason I bring that up is because at that high school, 30 years earlier, there was a helicopter crash, a midair helicopter crash, and it rained down parts of this exploded helicopter on a school, an elementary school, which kids were playing with. I mean, imagine the horror, right? So that's a big deal. And I'm like, I knew that was in the same area as where Kobe Bryant went to high school. And, that's where the story began. So within this story, this presentation, which I put forth in with Greg, it had to do with the helicopter. It began with Kobe Bryant dying in this dramatic helicopter crash. And it just so happened that 30 years earlier, there was a dramatic helicopter crash. Like, how many dramatic helicopter crashes do you know? And it also dealt with, in an indirect way, Kobe Bryant. He wasn't in high school at that time, but it's the same place. And it also had a very high profile death associated with it. I'm not going to go into it now, but also of significance within that presentation had to do a little bit with Kabbalistic magic and why Kobe fit into this sacrificial role. But what I want to point out right here is, so this is where that crash happened on 4/4/91, happened over Lower Marion Elementary School. This is where Kobe went to high school, and this was where Kobe's father was the coach at this Hebrew academy. And so that's kind of where we begin. And then I indicated just a moment ago that there was another high-profile death associated with the helicopter crash that happened in 1991. So there was a celebrity death, if you will, with the Kobe helicopter crash, which is very rare, and then this other helicopter crash that happened right over here also had, a celebrity, if you will. And who was that celebrity? That celebrity was John Hines. And so his degree of fame isn't exactly like, celebrity is not the right word, but he had an air of national recognition in two sort of places. One was he was a congressman. And then the second is he was the heir, or one of the heirs, of the Heinz condiment fortune, like Heinz ketchup. Like this is the great grandson of the guy who founded it, or maybe the great grandson of the guy who founded it. So where the story gets interesting, and so is it all ties into Skull and Bones when I go into this in the presentation, and so this was a hit. So the reason I'm not the first one to say this is what they were saying when it happened, because the day after Congressman Hines dies, there was another explosion of another senator who died, and both Hines and this other senator, who was Senator Tower, they both were very much involved with the Iran-Contra commission, like really delving into questioning CIA activities. And so most researchers at the time was like, yeah, this is kind of like payback for it. But where it was really interesting is the fact that ultimately Iran-Contra pointed to the head of the CIA, who was at the time was George Bush Sr. And George Bush Sr. is a well-known, Sr. and his son Jr. were well-known members of Skull and Bones. And Hines, I don't know if he himself was Skull and Bones, but his father most definitely was Skull and Bones. But I do know Hines went to Yale, so probably he was Skull and Bones also. Like, those records of membership are a little bit hard to find. But there is some confirmation, and his father most definitely was a member. So it was like a Skull and Bones taking out another Skull and Bones. Like, I'm just going to imagine here, like, that's a big deal. And where it gets even more interesting was Hines's wife, his widow, remarries, and she remarries John Kerry, third Skull and Bones. So the point I want to say is, like, all of this, what we're seeing in here is Skull and Bones and like hits and ritual murders and magic and all this stuff is going on. I made this all of these slides which I'm showing were what I sent Greg at the time, and you could see all of the different sort of bullet points which I kind of covered in that presentation. So there's one last piece I want to get into to why, how this ties into what's going on. So also around this time, early 2020, I was talking a lot about the number 57. It began with me talking about 57 because I just moved into a new place and I made this house sign and the number was 57. Then I talked about this Kobe Bryant thing, and then John Hines, and Hines is 57, Hines 57, they kind of go hand in hand. There's some other 57 sort of stuff, but 57's in play, 57's in play. So, all right. So I got this funny feeling in my gut. And for whatever reason, I make the connection at the same day that I've got this funny feeling in my gut that this presentation I am doing is on Kobe Bryant's birthday, or death day, excuse me. So let's go here. I got 6 coincidences. I'm calling them coincidences right now, which tie into this letter. Okay, so the first one, as I said, is the date of the presentation is on the Kobe death anniversary. Here's the letter. This came out on, this was the very first connection. He didn't say to me, like, hey, dude, I'd love to have you. Let's go work out a schedule. When are you available? He was saying, this is the date. This date was already decided, January 26th, and January 26th is the date in which Kobe Bryant's helicopter crashes. Number 2. The location of the presentation is 9 miles from the Hines crash site. So remember, the two main points, or the beginning points of that Kobe presentation, had to do with the linkage between helicopter crashes. And the correspondence was Kobe Bryant. One was place, and then the other, so, okay. So we talked about the first one right here was the date of Kobe Bryant's death, and now we're talking about the location. So let's go and look at this. So it says right here, this is where the meeting is to take place. In this restaurant. This is a restaurant. So this is where the restaurant is. And then this is where the helicopter crash took place. This is 919, right? 919 miles as the crow flies. It would take me, 11.1 miles if I were to drive this route. And here we see this is where it took place. It was a helicopter crash over Marion Elementary School in Lower Marion Township. That's right here. So there's coincidence number 2. All right. So that wasn't enough for me. So it's like I'm looking at this. So I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay, that lines up. And hats off to my friend Mark. Mark was the one. He's like, I told him about the date. He's like, well, what about the location? Is that near where the crash was? I'm like, well, I'm going to take a look. So thank you, Mark, for helping me start to pull on this thread. So I see that's 9 miles apart. And how my mind works is like, I want to see a tighter orb. I want to see it on the same spot. I'm certain there's a restaurant across the street from that spot, or it could have been on the same block. Like I wanted something like that, But I mean, trust me, 9 miles in the grand scheme of things, 9 miles is in the inner circle of the bull's eye, if you will. So I looked more precisely, though, at the location of this restaurant, and it is located in Rose Valley, Pennsylvania. And so that is going to be meaningful for any of you folks who are familiar with Jay Parker and his work. So let's go into it. So Jay Parker, I first became aware of his work through listening to this presentation on Higher Side Chats. This was years before I ever gave my first presentation. And Jay Parker, if you're familiar with him, his area of expertise has to do with satanic ritual abuse. He claims to have been a survivor of that. He's a whistleblower, and he's like a naming of names and pointer of locations. And so this is from the notes of this presentation. If you haven't listened to this, I would say definitely go listen to Jay's work. I make reference to a lot of it, particularly in all of the work I've brought on Wilmington, Delaware. But nonetheless, so Jay, he talks about two places. The two places of being these villages. Here it's described as elite pedophile rings, but he says more specifically it's all of these satanic covens, if you will. And one is in Arden, Delaware, where Jay claims, that he was raised there, and he talks about that. And he says that there is a twinned version of what's happening in Arden, Delaware, in Rose Valley, Pennsylvania. Rose Valley, Pennsylvania. So this is where the restaurant is, 9 miles away from the crash site. And here's Rose Valley. And this is, I don't know exactly how far this extends, but here's our Rose Valley. And we can see this is about a mile away. So this is a little bit closer. So there's coincidence number 3, excuse me. Let's go on to number 4. The invitation was sent 57 motherfucking days before the presentation. This is it. The invitation came with all of the dates and location. Everything was all planned out, and it was sent November 30th, 2021. As you recall, it is for January 26th. This is the last day of November. There are 31 days in December, so there's 31 plus then 26 days in January, and we get 57. 57 corresponds to both John Hines, also corresponds to Uncle Mike over here now, doesn't it? All right, so we got 57. We got this right here. Calculate the duration of days, so we can see 57's right there. So, all right. So this one's a little bit, not as sharp, if you will, of a coincidence, but nonetheless. All right. So I started looking, and it was told to me what was the Masonic lodge which this person is associated with, and it was not in the vicinity. It was not in the vicinity. It's in the greater Philadelphia area. All of the these places which I'm showing you, Rose Valley, Lower Merion, they're all in the Philadelphia suburbs. But you know, I think that his lodge was actually in Philadelphia, the city. And so I went and I looked. I was like, okay, well, what's the closest lodge to this location, the location of this restaurant? And so you could see this was my search right here, Freemasonic Lodges near Media, PA. And Media's right here. Philadelphia's right here. This is the Delaware River. Wilmington, Delaware is right here. Lancaster's a little bit further to the west. And so we can see this map, and what appears to be the closest is right here, the Springfield Masonic Hall, but you can see this logo is a little bit different. I think that this is more of something that can be rented out, like a banquet hall or something like this. It's not exactly a lodge. And the closest lodge, maybe this one might be the closest one, but this is the one which I went to. It is lodge number 322. So why is that significant? How far away is it? It's about 11 miles, 12 miles away. Because I'm not certain if this is correct, but I'm pretty confident it is. All of the Masonic lodges that are numbered throughout North America, the United States, like there are no duplicates. Like number one is there's not two number ones, you know. And so when this is lodge number 322, this is the only lodge 322, and 322 is the number associated with Skull and Bones. Now, mind you, like, you know, Skull and Bones theoretically has absolutely no correlation directly with Masonry. But there are, you know, it's I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just going to throw that out there, that this shows up right in the presentation in the story which we're talking about. And you can go and see this is also Route 322, and this same route goes right past after the cloister, and I believe it also goes, maybe the road, I can't say this for certain, but I'm pretty certain it's the road which the Masonic Lodge, which goes through Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is, you know, maybe 50 miles to the west, and that's lodge number 666. So if, you know, if those numbers mean anything. So okay, let's go on to coincidence number 6. The invitation is similar in concept to the premise behind Tracy Twyman's final book. And if you read it, that didn't turn out too well for the protagonist in the book. So, all right. So we all know the story of Tracy Twyman. You know, take that however you want. There is a bit of a trail of quote-unquote conspiracy researchers having untimely and unusual deaths. I would say maybe beginning with Jim Keith. That's the first one that comes to mind for me. And then Dave McGowan, Tracy Twyman definitely fits into it. And then we've got, like, you know, other people, Isaac Cappy and so forth, who kind of also fit into that narrative. And, you know, everything's in question, but I'm just saying, like, you know, that's out there. So, okay. So, Tracy Twyman, her final book, if you have not read it, it was called Genuflect. I think it came out about 2 years before she died. It was fiction. It was her only fiction book. But most people who've read it is like, no, this is just Tracy Twyman, like, really spelling it out, but she's doing it under the guise of fiction. I don't know if I'd recommend it for anyone to read it. I did not find it a pleasant experience, but nonetheless, how the story begins is right here. Pamela Auger, who most people, you know, rightly assume is Tracy Twyman in the story, received an invitation to give a lecture at a prestigious private club regarding her arcane historical research into the mysteries of the Knights Templar. But as she is about to learn, when opportunity knocks, it's best to ask for ID before opening the door. So in that story, the person was invited, the person was a researcher who did like this really weird research and was invited like to come and speak at this prestigious club, and they flew her over there, and then it just didn't, it turned out not to be too good for the character. So, those are our 6 coincidences. And I'll be quite honest with you. As soon as I saw those, as soon as this kind of like, imagine it like a thread. Like when I first saw that email, I read through it. Like the email reads totally fine and sweet, right? But then when that thread, when that tiny little thread like first appears and then you pull it, like it unravels really, really easily. So, okay, and once that happened, that's what I was going to say, is like, suddenly that anxiety, I talked to a bunch of people. As soon as this happened, if you got a call from me, you're in my inner circle. And I called you and I was like, listen, let me just tell you this little story. Let me just hear what you got to say about it. But like after discussing the whole thing, like, it kind of passed through me. So, because you guys are family, I am going to go and walk you through what happened next with me. So I kind of went down like, my style of of analysis. This is where it goes, or this is my internal process. So I go and I kind of have this decision tree. All right. So the first question: is the letter legit? Is this really like, from the person saying all of this sort of stuff? Is it from the person who is supposedly the author of it? So yes or no. And I did the best I could to vet this person based upon, all of the information, every piece of information which I just told you was given to me. It was given to me. It was not hidden. It was out there for anyone who wants to go poke around, including like, who this individual is. And there were some indications within how the email was sent and the domain name of the email, which made it what I would say is highly probable that the person who sent it is the one who didn't, or the one who said who signed the email. They're the ones who sent it. It's possible that it was not, and if that was the case, someone went to extraordinary lengths. But that, if you really want to go and fool someone, like, you go to extraordinary lengths. So if it's not the person who sent it, then the question is, was it a prank? Am I being goofed on? Which would be kind of funny, right? Or is it serious? Is it serious for something else? Like, who knows? But nonetheless, this is kind of like where the yes made more sense to me, or I put a little bit more weight to that. So the next question I go and ask is, are the coincidences done on purpose? So these 6 coincidences listed here, or are they purposeful, or are the majority of them purposeful? Who knows? So that is the question. So again, it's either a yes or it's a no. So let's go first with the possibility: is it no? And so if it's no, so then you got to ask yourself, and maybe there's a third or fourth answer or possibility, but these are the 2 primary ones. Is this is just a coincidence? This is literally like, this is a coincidence. Coincidences happen, and these things, like, yeah, like all of that is true, but none of that means anything. It's like, they're coincidences. A broken clock is right twice a day, sort of thing. So that's a possibility. That's a possibility. If you are going to play in the game which we're playing in, you have to be able to walk this razor thin line. If you want to have like any sort of desire to not go over the deep edge. So, okay, so you have to ask yourself these questions. So coincidence, that's always a possibility. Or, no, it wasn't a coincidence, it was a synchronicity. It was whatever synchronicity may be. Like, this was kind of put out there for me. It was put out there for me to go through this exercise, which I'm describing to you people right now, because who else is going to go through this exercise other than, like, you know, someone whose mind is wired in the way that my mind is wired. So, you know, there's this is the synchronicity is built into the fabric of reality. And there was a point in time where, like, you know, I chose to, me as an individual, you have to come to this choice, each individual, like, there's a fork in the road in the general approach to life, where you're going to have to say that there is some degree of order, or there's something of a higher order or power that is behind our reality, or you say there isn't. And for me, that is defined, at least one of the ways is understood, this interconnectedness, because I believe in synchronicity as opposed to coincidence theory, synchronicity theory versus coincidence theory. Because if we're being honest with ourselves, no one knows for certain. You could choose not to make a decision, or if you're going to make a decision, at least be, you know, a big boy about it and say, this is what I choose to believe. And so this is how I live my life. So you know where I'm going to go with this. But I'm open to the fact that I could be wrong. You know, I'm open to the fact that I have blind spots. So there's that. So now we're going to go back over here. But suppose this isn't coincidence. Or suppose this was done on purpose. Suppose this was. And all of that information was given to me in one email. And just as I said, like, you know, who else is going to go and figure this out other than someone who thinks like me? And if all of the books on how Masonic mockery and communication and green language and all of that stuff is accurate, and particularly the more sinister side of these organizations, if all of the claims in all of these books is accurate, well then, all right, so if this is a yes, this fits into that model. So, okay, if it's a yes, I see this is kind of like three different possibilities. One is it's a threat, meaning like nothing's going to happen. We're just kind of letting you know that we know that you know. It's like brandishing a weapon. Like brandishing a weapon means, like, you know, if you got if you're wearing a holster and you lift up your shirt and you let someone know that you've got a sidearm, like you're kind of like, I'm not saying I'm going to use it, but I want to let you know that I've got this. And so, like, you know, that's what I mean by a threat. Like, this is just a threat. Or another possibility, this is an admission of intent. You know, me and Ross Ben talk about this a lot, about how on a certain level that things are done, even the most nefarious things are done in harmony with universal principles, universal laws. And part of that is, like, you know, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to do, so there are no surprises. And then also, by you accepting this invitation, you know exactly what you are accepting. So that's what I mean by admission of intent. And the third possibility is maybe this is a prank. Maybe it's maybe it's a joke. Maybe these are my brothers. Maybe these are, like, you know, it's like I would go there and it's like, surprise, like the whole thing is just a joke. None of this is really happening, and, like, you know, the whole thing, and, like, you know, that's a possibility. So all right. So the question is, what you gonna do, Uncle Mike?